I'll never forget the night they laughed at me. Not laughter filled with love or warmth, but sharp laughter like glass breaking. And every shard seemed aimed straight at me. But before I tell you what happened, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Edith Grant. I'm 74 years old, and this is my story. I want to take a moment before we begin. Tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Sometimes we feel alone in our struggles, but stories like these remind us that we're not. Now, let me take you back to the night my family mocked my cane and whispered I wouldn't last the year. That was the moment everything changed. I never thought the sound of laughter would cut me so deeply. Not the warm kind, not the sort that used to fill this very dining room when my husband was alive and the children were small. No, this laughter was sharp, mean-spirited, and aimed squarely at me. My own flesh and blood sat there with plates of food I had prepared, clinking glasses and whispering behind their napkins as though I couldn't hear. But I did hear. "She won't last the year," my daughter-in-law muttered with a smirk, her voice carrying just enough that the others could catch it. "Look at her cane. She can barely walk across the room without wobbling." The words stung, but what burned more was the sound of my son chuckling at her side. "Don't worry, the house will be ours soon enough," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to measure my worth in bricks and wood. I gripped my cane under the table, my knuckles turning white. That cane had become a steady companion these past few years, after a fall that left my hip weaker than before. It was supposed to help me keep my balance, not become the punchline of my family's cruel jokes. Then, as if to twist the knife, my grandson, just 11 years old, impressionable and innocent not long ago, got up and began to mimic me. He bent his back, shuffled his feet, and tapped an imaginary stick against the floor. Laughter erupted around the table. His sister giggled. His mother clapped her hands and said, "See, he's just like Grandma." That was the moment my chest tightened, not from weakness, but from the realization that their poison had seeped into the next generation. My grandchildren were learning to laugh at me, not with me. I cleared my throat, hoping to bring the room back to order to remind them that I was still here, still capable of speaking. But before I could get more than a word out, my son waved a hand dismissively. "Mom, just sit down before you fall. Don't embarrass yourself." Embarrass myself. The woman who had given him life, who had stayed up countless nights when he was sick, who worked 2 jobs after his father passed just so he and his sister could go to college. And now in my own home, I was reduced to a nuisance. I sat back, my face calm, but my heart pounding. I said nothing, but inside something hardened. They thought I was too old, too weak, too close to the grave to matter. They thought the cane made me fragile. What they didn't realize was that every cruel word was fueling a fire I hadn't felt in years. Dinner carried on with their shallow chatter. My daughter-in-law talked about new drapes she wanted for when we redo this place. My son nodded like it was already theirs. My grandchildren asked when they could move into Grandma's room, and I just sat there holding my fork in one hand and my cane in the other, forcing myself to chew each bite of food as though nothing was happening. But in my mind, I was already elsewhere, planning, calculating, remembering every sacrifice I had made for the very people who now mocked me. I thought of my husband. God rest his soul. He had always said I was stronger than I knew, that I had a steel backbone hidden beneath soft words and kind hands. "Don't let them treat you like you're already gone," he once told me back when I worried about being a burden. Those words echoed in me that night. The truth was, they were already writing me off as if I were dead and buried. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. When the plates were cleared and the laughter shifted into clinking glasses of wine, I quietly excused myself. No one noticed. No one asked if I needed help. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step aching, each step reminding me of the body that had grown older but not defeated. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cane leaning against the nightstand. They saw it as a symbol of weakness, but to me that cane was something else. Survival, proof that I had stumbled, but not fallen. And as I sat there in the silence of my room, hearing their muffled laughter downstairs, I whispered to myself, "They think I won't last the year. Let's see how they manage when I'm still here, and the house isn't." I didn't know every step of the plan yet, but I knew this much. I would not let their cruelty be the last word in my life. They had mocked me, underestimated me, and stripped me of dignity at that table. They thought they were preparing to inherit. What they didn't realize was that I had just inherited a new kind of strength, and I was about to use it. The house was quiet the next morning, at least for a while. I was in the kitchen slowly pouring myself a cup of tea when I caught voices drifting in from the living room. I thought the children had left already, but then I recognized the tone. Low, hurried, conspiratorial. I set my cup down and stood perfectly still, careful not to let the cane tap against the tiles. "Once she's gone, we'll knock out the wall and open up the space," my son was saying. His voice carried with excitement, the way it used to when he talked about new jobs or vacations. But now it was about my house. The kitchen's dated anyway, and Melissa wants a walk-in pantry. We'll finally make it ours. "As soon as she's gone," he said. "Not when Mom decides to move. Not if she chooses something smaller." Gone. Melissa's voice came next, smooth as silk and twice as cutting. "She's stubborn, but one fall and we'll have the papers ready. It's just a matter of time. Nursing homes are safer for someone like her anyway." I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my hand shook. They weren't just waiting. They were planning, counting down, speaking of my life as if it were already over. My house as if it were theirs. For a moment I felt my knees weaken. Then something snapped inside me. I stepped out into the hallway, leaning heavily on my cane, and let my voice cut through their scheming. "So this is what I am to you?" I asked, my tone steady, though my chest burned. "A deed waiting to be signed? A house you can't wait to gut and repaint?" They froze. My son's eyes widened. Caught. Melissa recovered first, crossing her arms and tilting her head. "Mom, you shouldn't be sneaking around. You'll hurt yourself. Don't twist this," I snapped, my voice sharper than they'd heard in years. I heard every word. "I may walk with a cane, but I'm not deaf. I'm not blind, and I'm certainly not gone." My son tried to soften it with that fake calm he always used when he thought I was being overly emotional. "Mom, you're misinterpreting. We're just being realistic. You can't take the house with you. It's too much for you to handle. We're trying to make sure everything's ready." "Ready?" I barked. "You're ready for me to die. That's what you mean." The silence that followed was louder than any laughter from the night before. My cane tapped once against the hardwood floor, deliberate, echoing. Melissa gave a cold laugh, shaking her head. "You always overreact. We're only trying to make the best of things. Honestly, it's selfish. Clinging to a house you can't manage when it could finally be put to good use." That word selfish nearly made me laugh. Me, the woman who had given them everything, who kept a roof over their heads, who paid tuition, who skipped meals some nights so they never went without. I looked straight at my son. "Tell me," I said, my voice dropping low. "Do you remember the nights I sat up when you had a fever, whispering prayers over your bed? Do you remember how I worked double shifts so you could graduate without debt? Do you remember who sacrificed so you could have this life?" He shifted uncomfortably, eyes dropping to the floor. But Melissa didn't flinch. "The past is the past. You can't keep using it as leverage. Everyone moves on eventually." "Eventually," I repeated, letting the word hang. "Yes, everyone does, but I'm not gone yet. And as long as I'm breathing, you'd better remember whose name is on that deed." For the first time, I saw a flash of anger in my son's eyes. Not guilt, not shame, but anger that I had reminded him of the truth. His jaw tightened. "You can't keep this up forever, Mom. We'll figure it out." "Try me," I said, cane tapping once more as I turned back toward the kitchen. "Go on, try me." I didn't wait for their reply. I let the silence sit heavy behind me, like dust settling after a storm. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. Something inside me had shifted. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about my husband again. He would have been furious to see how his son spoke to me. He would have told me not to take it lying down. And I realized I couldn't. I wasn't going to beg for respect. I wasn't going to hope they came to their senses. I was going to take control in a way they never saw coming. If they thought I was too weak to fight back, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, I didn't linger over breakfast. I didn't wait for the house to be filled with whispers or smirks. I dressed in my best coat, the one my husband always said made me look like I meant business, and I left before anyone could stop me. My cane clicked steadily against the pavement as I walked to the bus stop, each tap fueling my resolve. I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to fight. And I knew exactly where to begin. Samuel Price had been our family lawyer for over 30 years. He was there when my husband and I bought the house, when we wrote our first will, even when we set up a trust for the children's education. He'd seen me through grief, paperwork, and endless signatures. He knew my history, and he knew my strength. When I walked into his office, he looked up from behind his desk and smiled warmly. "Edith," he said, standing to greet me. "It's been too long. What brings you in today?" I sat down, leaning my cane against the chair. My hands trembled slightly, not from age but from the storm inside me. "Samuel, I need to change everything," I said, my voice firm. "The will, the house, the future, all of it." His eyebrows rose. "Everything. Everything." I told him about the dinner table, about the laughter, about the whispers I'd overheard, my son speaking of renovations, Melissa planning my funeral, and everything but words. I could see Samuel's jaw tighten as he listened, his pen tapping softly against his legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "You've given them everything, Edith, and this is how they repay you." "They think I'm already dead," I said flatly. "So, let's give them a shock. I want it ironclad. Not 1 cent to them, not one heirloom, nothing." He studied me for a moment, perhaps looking for hesitation, but I met his gaze, steady. "Are you certain?" he asked finally. "Decisions like this, they can't be taken back once." "I'm certain," I cut in. "They mocked me in my own home. They spoke of my death as if it were a holiday to look forward to. I would rather see strangers inherit than leave them a dime." Samuel gave a small, almost mischievous smile. "Then we'll make it impossible for them to touch a thing." For the next 2 hours we worked, papers drafted, signatures prepared. He explained every clause, every condition. We structured it so the assets would be locked into a trust for a local charity I admired, with contingencies that no contest from family could undo. As I signed the final page, my hand steady, Samuel leaned forward. "You know," he said, "this will hit them harder than any scolding at a dinner table." I let out a bitter laugh. Good, they wanted to count down my days. Let's see how they count their pennies instead. But I wasn't finished. "What about the house?" I asked. "They've already claimed it in their minds. They think it's theirs." "It's still in your name," he reminded me. "You can sell it whenever you please. And if you want discretion, we can arrange the paperwork quietly. By the time they notice, it'll be too late." Too late. The words warmed me like sunlight after a storm. I nodded. "Do it. Line up the papers. I want it ready within the month." Samuel leaned back, studying me with a kind of admiration I hadn't seen in years. "You know, Edith, most people in your situation just accept it. They fold. They convince themselves family is family, no matter how cruel. But you," he shook his head with a smile, "you still have steel in you. I always knew you did." I picked up my cane, gripping it firmly. "They thought this cane made me weak. Let's show them it makes me steady." As I left his office, the sun felt brighter on my face. The anger was still there, but it was different now, channeled, sharpened, given purpose. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about dignity, about reminding them that I wasn't a piece of furniture to be moved aside. I was still their mother, their elder, the woman who had built the foundation they now stood on. And soon they would learn exactly how wrong they had been to mock me. The first box I packed was the hardest. It wasn't just clothes or knickknacks. It was memories. My husband's old flannel shirts still faint with his cologne. The photo albums I'd leafed through on lonely nights. The watch he wore every day for 30 years, scratched, worn, but priceless to me. I wrapped each item carefully, almost ceremonially, before setting them aside. The rest, furniture, dishes, decorations, all of it was just weight, and I was ready to lighten the load. As I stacked the boxes in the hallway, I heard the front door slam. Heavy footsteps. Then my son's voice, sharp and demanding. "What the hell is all this?" I looked up calmly. "I'm packing," I said. Melissa stepped in behind him, her eyes scanning the hallway like a vulture circling prey. She let out a cold laugh. "Packing for what?" Finally giving in to reality. I tightened my grip on the cane. "For moving?" My son's face twisted. "Moving? You can't just decide that without talking to us first." "Talking to you?" I echoed, my voice rising. "This is my home. My name is on the deed. I don't need your permission to breathe, let alone to move." Melissa scoffed, stepping closer. "Oh, please don't act like you're in control. You can barely get down the stairs without clinging to that stick. Do you think anyone's going to want this dump once you're done hobbling around it?" Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I turned and picked up my husband's watch, holding it in my palm. "Not a dump, a home, and one you will never own." My son's temper flared. He jabbed a finger at the boxes. You're out of your mind, Mom. This is family property. Dad built this for us, for our future. You don't get to just take that away. Your father built this for me and him. I snapped back, my voice shaking with anger. We poured every dollar, every ounce of sweat into this place. You were children playing in the yard while we worked to pay the mortgage. Don't you dare rewrite history. He stepped forward, his voice dropping low. If you keep this up, we'll have you declared unfit. A judge will see you can't live alone. Then this house will be ours whether you like it or not. For a moment, the threat hung in the air like poison. Melissa smirked, clearly satisfied with the blow. But then I smiled. Slow, deliberate, sharp. Try me, I said, Kane tapping once against the hardwood. Go on, march me into court, and tell a judge your mother is incompetent because she chooses to live her life her way. Tell them you mocked me at dinner, counted down the days until I die, and already picked out drapes for a house you don't own. Let's see how far you get. His face reened, fury bubbling beneath the surface. Melissa tugged his arm, whispering something about not wasting energy. But before leaving, she turned back with venom in her voice. You think you're clever, Edith, but you won't last long. And when you're gone, everything will be ours anyway. I stood tall, cane steady in my hand. No, I said firmly. When I'm gone, you'll have nothing but the echo of your own cruelty. They stormed out, the door rattling in its frame behind them. I stood there for a long while, my heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly. But not from fear, from release. For the first time in years, I hadn't swallowed my words. I hadn't let them walk all over me. I had fired back, and I had seen the shock in their eyes. They weren't used to me standing my ground. As I sealed the last box, I whispered to myself, they think I'm fading. They think I'm weak. But I'm not done yet. I've just begun. And as I looked around the house, the walls that had held laughter, sorrow, and every chapter of my life, I felt something shift. The memories would always be mine. But the house was about to become theirs, only in dreams. The papers came through faster than I expected. Samuel had moved things quietly, pulling every string to make sure there were no delays, no whispers of the sale before it was done. By the second week, I had a buyer lined up, a couple in their 50s, kinded, respectful, the type who saw the house for what it was, a home, not a prize, waiting for vultures. When I signed the final documents, Samuel slid the pen from my fingers with a look of satisfaction. It's done, he said. By the time they notice, the ink will be dry and the money safe. I nodded, relief washing over me. Good. Let them choke on their entitlement. That evening, as I folded the last of my clothes into a suitcase, the front door banged open. My son and Melissa stormed in like they owned the place, their faces tight with suspicion. We heard you're selling? My son barked, tossing his keys on the table. Is it true? I turned slowly, cane steady, voice calm. It's not true. He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. I let the silence sit a beat before adding, it's not true because it's already done. The house is sold. Melissa gasped, color draining from her cheeks. You can't do that. This is ours. You can't just sell it out from under us. Ours? I asked, raising my brows. Funny. I don't recall your name on a single payment slip. Not one mortgage check, not one repair bill. I don't recall you holding me up when I worked 2 jobs to keep this roof over us. This was never yours. Not then, not now, not ever. My son's face turned red, his fists clenching at his sides. You're losing it, Mom. This is insanity. You need help. Help? I snapped, stepping forward until the tip of my cane tapped against the hardwood between us. No, what I needed was respect. And instead I got laughter. I got whispers. I got my own children circling me like wolves, waiting for the old one to fall. Melissa's voice sharpened. You'll regret this. Who's going to take care of you when you're all alone in some tiny apartment? When you fall and no one's there to pick you up? I leaned on the cane and looked her dead in the eye. Better to fall alone with dignity than to stand surrounded by jackals. For the first time, my son looked unsettled. Not just angry, but unsettled. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The fight drained from his posture, replaced by something uglier. Fear. Fear that he just lost the one thing he thought he was guaranteed. I picked up my suitcase, my coat draped neatly over it, and moved toward the door. Mom! He called after me, his voice cracking with desperation. You can't just walk away from family. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. The air was thick, the silence heavy. Then I turned my head just enough for them to see my face. Family doesn't mock the woman who gave them life, I said softly. Family doesn't count down the days until she dies. You stopped being family the moment you chose greed over love. Now you can live with nothing but the sound of your own laughter ringing in your ears. And with that, I opened the door and stepped out. The night air was cool, crisp, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The house that had been both a treasure and a burden was no longer mine, and neither were the chains my children tried to wrap around me. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't leave explanations. On the kitchen table, I placed a single folded note. Don't wait for me. I've gone to live. As I walked down the street, cane tapping a steady rhythm, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The street lamps glowed above me, guiding me forward, and each step carried me further away from their cruelty. I wasn't running from them. I was walking toward myself. They gathered like vultures in Samuel's office a week later. My son, his wife, even the grandchildren, all dressed up, pretending this was some solemn affair. But I knew the truth. They weren't mourning me. They were salivating. I wasn't there, of course. That was part of the beauty. I was miles away in a small coastal town, sipping tea on a porch that smelled of salt and freedom. But Samuel had promised me he'd read my words exactly as I'd written them, and I trusted him. He later described the scene to me in vivid detail. My son leaned back in his chair, arms folded with the smug confidence of a man certain he was about to inherit. Melissa sat forward, eyes sharp, already mentally redecorating her house. The grandchildren were restless, kicking their feet, waiting for the moment when their parents would announce what Grandma left us. Samuel cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Thank you all for coming. I'll get straight to the point. Mrs. Grant has finalized her estate plan. Melissa leaned in, her lips twitching upward. The house, Samuel continued, has been sold. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then Melissa's voice cracked like glass. Sold? What do you mean, sold? It means, Samuel said evenly, that it is no longer part of this estate. It has been legally transferred to new owners. The proceeds have been placed into a private trust. None of you are beneficiaries. The room erupted. My son shot up from his chair, fists slamming onto the desk. That's impossible. She can't do that without telling us. She could. Samuel replied calmly. And she did. Melissa's face flushed crimson. This is fraud. We'll contest it. We'll drag this through court until we get what's ours. Samuel slid a thick folder across the desk. You're welcome to try, but these documents make the estate ironclad. The trust is secured, the assets transferred. There is nothing for you to contest. Then he pulled out the envelope. My letter, my voice. However, he said, your mother did leave you something, a message. He unfolded the papers slowly, letting the silence stretch until they were practically shaking with rage. And then he read, You said I wouldn't last the year. You mocked my cane, my steps, my strength. You laughed at the woman who carried you, who fed you, who sacrificed everything so you could live the life you now take for granted. You spoke of my home as if it were already yours. You forgot one thing. I am not gone. Not yet. And while I am alive, I will not be stripped of dignity by the very people who should have guarded it. Melissa shifted in her seat, her jaw tight, her nails digging into the armrest. My son muttered under his breath, his face turning pale. Samuel continued, his voice steady. You will inherit nothing. Not the house, not the savings, not the heirlooms. Those are already spoken for, placed into hands that will honor them. What you are left with is the memory of your cruelty. I hope in the silence of this house you longed for, you hear your own laughter echoing back at you. May it keep you company since my love no longer will. When Samuel looked up, the room was silent. Then the storm came. My son cursed, slamming his chair back. She's lost her mind. She was manipulated. Melissa shrieked, her voice shrill. We'll sue. We'll have this overturned. She can't cut out her own family. But Samuel didn't flinch. She could, and she did. The grandchildren looked bewildered, glancing from one parent to the other, realizing for the first time that Grandma's weakness had turned into power none of them expected. Samuel later told me that when they finally stormed out of his office, they left behind nothing but the bitter stench of defeat. And me? I sat hundreds of miles away, the letter I had written still fresh in my mind, a cup of tea warming my hands. I smiled, imagining their faces. Rage, shock, disbelief. For once they weren't laughing. The morning after Samuel read my letter, I sat on the porch of my new cottage, listening to the gulls wheel over the sea. The air smelled of salt and freedom, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The house I'd left behind was no longer mine, but that was the point. I wasn't chained to walls where whispers of greed echoed louder than love. I wasn't trapped at a table where my cane was a joke instead of a symbol of survival. Here in this little place by the coast, I was simply Edith again. Not the burden, not the old woman who won't last the year, just myself. I joined a local garden club where no one cared if I walked slowly. I shared tea with neighbors who listened without rolling their eyes. Even my cane, once mocked, became something different. A steady rhythm against the porch boards, proof that I was still standing. I thought often of my husband. I imagined him smiling, proud that I hadn't bowed my head and accepted humiliation. Proud that I'd chosen dignity over silence. To those who betrayed me, I left nothing but the echo of their cruelty. To myself, I left peace. And to you listening now, don't ever let anyone write your ending before you do. You still hold the pen. So tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know, because from where I sit, with the waves rolling in and the horizon wide open, I can tell you this much. Life doesn't end when others decide it should. It begins again the moment you decide to take it back.